Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Facebook event page. That's episode 205, Modernizing Masonry, or in the YouTube chat running alongside this YouTube video. Over here, I guess. You know me. My name is John Ruark, past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And a small crowd tonight, but we've got a quorum, starting with Robert Johnson from Waukegan, Illinois.
Hello, RJ, Robert Johnson, Waukegan Lodge 78, past master there, current sitting secretary. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Coolio. Thank you, Robert. And last for now, but not least, Juan Sepulveda.
Hello, everybody. Juan Sepulveda here from Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in Kissimmee, Florida, and the host of the Winding Stairs Freemasonry podcast.
All right. Thank you, Juan. So to get right into this week's topic, one thing that I found pretty interesting is the pre-show buzz that's been going on with Reddit as far as this topic in particular, about the concept of modernizing Masonry. And so I thought it'd be fair to really kind of break that down and figure out what is the definition of modernization. And so a quick Google search will show that modernization is, quote, the process of adapting something to modern needs or habits. And the first thing I thought of when I heard that definition was what Jack Aconilio brought to WCY this week when he guest hosted the Whence Came You podcast and did an excellent research paper on the modern role of women in society, and specifically how gender roles have shifted, if not changed or flipped around in certain households in the 2018s compared to where they were one generation ago, 2 generations ago, right? And so he posits that Freemasonry needs to make their value proposition a little bit clearer to a new set of modern needs or habits, right? And that's exactly what we're talking about here in this episode. So the first question for the august panel we have here is, does Masonry need modernizing at all? What say you, Juan Sepulveda?
Okay. Well, keeping in mind that definition that you brought up, it is important that we recognize that with this episode, we're not saying the change of Masonry or the innovations within Masonry. We're talking about being able, well, at least not 100%. In bringing an organization into the modern era. And just like an individual who experiences no growth, no change, no positive improvement in his life will become stagnant, and it's almost inevitable that they would experience decline. So I see the same happening with Masonry. It is important that it is this organization that has been long established and respected, for it to be adapted to a degree so that it can continue thriving. Otherwise, if it doesn't meet the expectations of the new generations, it will become superfluous to them and go by the wayside.
Right, Robert, what say you? What does Masonry need modernizing at all?
So it's an interesting question to just posit like that, because our fraternity is billed as something that is traditional, highly, and the way people view the word traditional is of the old school. It hasn't changed, and we need to keep that, because this singular experience of the Robert Hurd's word, the initiatic experience, is so heavily weighted as this experience that must not change. In fact, the Conference of Grand Masters recognizes, I mean, that's one of the issues for recognition, is that you have the legend as it sits in Freemasonry, that particular legend has to exist for you to have recognition. And so a deviation from this quote unquote tradition breeds any number of coined terms: irregular, clandestine, what have you. So in one sense of the word, it is imperative that we do not modernize. But on the other side of that coin, we have a full example of the Scottish Rite within Masonic jurisdiction, who has, and I'm going to say that they are cheapening anything. I think the Northern jurisdiction has really, for the audience, especially recently with Glatley, in pushing for education and in working through this. But the way I feel is that there is a need for a certain amount of practical modernization that can be applied to the craft that does not detract from its original core tenets. You can keep the degree system the same. You can honor that system, and everybody can still go through the degrees and respect that, whilst you are keeping yourself, like Jack said in his paper, and it's only chapter 1. First of all, the fact that he says chapter 1, I was like, what? Are you going to have more? I can't wait to read it. One of the comments immediately on YouTube was like, it sounds more like they need, marriage counseling than worrying about lodge. And I thought that was an interesting comment, but kind of off point, because like, marriages should be equitable, and as women share the workforce and men are in the workforce, the home life has to be more equitable. So if she's not going out, right, doing her things with her ladies, does it feel right going out with your guy or whatever? So however that needs to flow, I guess, and how do we modernize to accommodate this relationship, or modernize to allow those guys who need to be home more often the access to the fraternal life? So all the words I just said, yeah, I think we need some practical modernization, not modernization in terms of ritual changes or, admitting ladies or anything like that. I'm just saying practical modernization. I want to make sure that a lot of the people who on the pre-buzz on Reddit were like freaking out, like they've already said all these things that, they need to modernize and we need to be more corporate and all this stuff. And I don't know. I don't think I've ever, have we ever said Masonry needs to be more corporate?
That's the funny.
I may have said, I think we've said it needs to be run like a business.
Right. Which is different than a corporate identity. No, don't change everything. Everything has to be sterile and uniform. We never have ever said that. In fact, we've had many shows about affinity lodges and everything else. And I think it's interesting the way you were elaborating, Robert. I think it could be summarized as modernization, yes, innovation. And so why do you think it is that we have this resistance to just the concept of modernization? What is it in human nature? I mean, every other organization, you do not have the same cell phone you had 5 years ago, right? You don't have the same video games that you had 5 years ago. Why is anything else in your life acceptable to update and modernize? But we're not wearing powdered wigs to lodges, so there's at least one thing that's changed. What really should be kept traditional and what should be modernized? And you've alluded a little bit to that, Robert. What say you, Juan?
Yeah, and that is a good question. I think it will be, there's the ideal that some people have in their mind, that Freemasonry will remain the same for eternity. And you can't expect that. Tenets of Masonry, you can expect that from the core principles that are intended to be instilled in men through this organization. However, it would be naive to expect that core to remain effective and to reach the intended audience in an effective way without modernization. So I I agree that ritual should remain as pure as we can keep it, and the lessons contained therein should be left unadulterated. However, the method, perhaps not the method, because ritual is ritual, but perhaps the way in which communication is handled, the way in which we reach out to prospective members of the organization, and that can be modernized. Otherwise, every other organization around us will continue thriving, and then we'll be obsolete. I only see minutes, and I know we've talked about minutes a million times, but minutes are important to document what happened in meetings and to have this accountability, and this record of what happened. The way in which we handle it, the protocol in which we handle it, I think it's just it is so archaic. It's so foreign to the new generation of Masons that join, that it usually makes no sense to them for it to be handled that way. So I think those are aspects that need to modernization for sure.
You trigger me on that, because it was funny when you first set up the Winding Stairs Freemasonry group. One of the first questions you asked early on to kind of prime the pump of the conversation was, should cell phones be allowed in lodge?
Mm-hmm.
And my response, albeit brief, actually got quite a few likes, because although there were many people that said they should be locked outside and whatever, my viewpoint was very succinctly, business sometimes, ritual never.
Mm-hmm.
And I stand by that, because the business side of Freemasonry, paying bills, giving to charities, all of that is not sacrosanct, that is not esoteric, that is not speculative, secular, whatever you want to call it. Like, that is purely operations and maintenance of your fraternal organization. And as such, all of that should be, and I'm going to say, at least updated, if not modernized. Updated meaning we need to be able to keep modern records, right? And just as an example, I'm just pulling this out of the air. Why aren't lodge minutes collectively put in a Google Docs Google Docs document, and then that's automatically instantly approved? Everyone can edit and make sure everyone can see in real time the edits that are being made. Therefore, they're more accurate because it's not centralized, and two, it's real time, and actually saves time in the long run, because that's how every other business is run nowadays, with real time minutes being kept. And again, that's just for normal operations. And then once business is done, close the laptops, put away the cell phones, and then get to the true art that we're in. So what do you think of that? Robert, what say you?
I would very much agree with you. In fact, when you say business sometimes, ritual never, I'm probably even more I'm probably more okay with cell phones being used completely throughout a business meeting. As the master of the lodge in 2014/2015, there were a few things on the altar. A couple of them had to be there: Book of Constitutions, working tools, my gavel, and my cell phone. It was always out. Some guys were like, "Hey, man, we're having a meeting. You can put that away." I'm like, "Hey, man, all my notes are right here. This is how we get through this. Oh, in fact, when we go to make a presentation, I control the TV right here, and I'm going through my slide deck right here on my phone, and it's pushing to the, to the TV or whatever. So I'm very much in favor of using things like cell phones during business meetings. If I could, I'd put a little. How cool would it be to have like a little pop-up screen on the armchair of your chair, and so like as the master's going through and he's scrolling, all the three primary officers are seeing the same thing. Okay, next on the agenda is a really good friend and brother, Alan, who we've had dinner a few times. Just today, in fact, and I'm not going to say the name of the lodge or anything, but let me just read you this email I received this afternoon. This email came through at 5:53 this afternoon, and he says, "Good evening, Brother RJ. I'm in the southern jurisdiction in a state, and in this one lodge. I heard you once say your lodge approves the minutes through email, ellipses. I brought it up to the brothers at my lodge, and they think it's a clandestine lodge thing to do. If it's not too much to ask you, can you email me how your lodge brought it up to the brethren of your lodge, like how we passed it this way, and what else you guys do? And also, if you don't spend the time reading the minutes, what else do you do with your free time? LOL. No, seriously, that's a question that was asked of me. Thanks for all you do." And so literally there, I was like, what? So I guess I take it for granted that we can do this, that we can electronically pass minutes. I posted this, I redacted some of it, and I posted it on my Grand Lodge Facebook page, and it's gotten more attention than anything I've ever posted, sans controversial stuff. But it was just amazing to me. And Alan basically, who he basically took us through it, and he said, look, there is no part of your business meeting that shouldn't already be decided before you open, like pending votes. Like you should just bring it up, vote, done. And that's kind of a nice smooth transition. If you want to know how a lodge business meeting should be run, like as far as minutes and the way that goes, go to your city council, watch how fast they blast through that. I mean, it's pretty simple. But I don't want to get hung up on minutes, like modernizing the craft really is more than that. And one of the things that drives me nuts is my initial question about this whole thing was, John, you said, like, why are people so hung up on it? Why can't we change certain aspects? And I think what's interesting is it's like this idea that like it's sacrosanct, we can't touch it. But we also have this, like, there are already so many changes we've already made. Like, Freemasonry existed, came out and said we can't change anything, and has since made changes, like big changes.
What kind of changes, RJ? What are you thinking?
So, Jason will tell you, right? Like the third degree is one of the first innovations. They changed the entire thing. We flip-flopped passwords. We allow guys to join at 18 now instead of 21. What else? I just made a bunch of notes here, so pardon me for looking. But we're allowing men to merely witness degrees rather than take part. In my own view, we're removing making good men better from Freemasonry, right? Like, I'm not better just because I'm a member or have gone through the degrees. That doesn't make us better. And like knowing guys doesn't make me better. And taking part in charity organizational things doesn't make me better. So, like, where is that? There's just so many things, like
one-day classes.
So yeah, like one-day classes. Again, I have no problem with one-day class Masons.
Mm-hmm.
Like many of my best friends who are way more into Freemasonry and do way more than I ever could and will are one-day class guys. That's just a fact. But like that practice That's an innovation. That's change. And so we're okay with these things, but like, what's the deal with, I mean, we use minutes because it's a prime example of something that's so simple that we all have witnessed. But like, why can't you have, I mean, Grand Lodges in the past, we've had issues where they won't even have websites. They've shut down their own websites because they think it's bad. I mean, I don't get it.
I know Juan has taken a couple of notes as well here on what are some of those modern needs and habits that need to be addressed when we're considering modernizing Masonry as a whole.
Okay, so communication is, in my opinion, one of the biggest things that are habits of ours. So our communication habits are definitely going to have to be modernized within Masonry in order for them to line up and be compatible with what happens in the real world. So, for example, invitations to, or announcements for a meeting, for example. My lodge has everything. We have website. We just announced Twitter. We have, what else do we have? We have our digital Trestle board, and we have an application that we use. Man, I wish I knew the name of it, because the application, some brothers might see it familiar. So none of the tenets of Freemasonry have been compromised in the creation and utilization of this application. Instead, it creates a more fertile communication grounds. We can see when people show up to lodge and they're there to do some work, they'll put a shout out here, and all the brothers of our lodge will get a notification, and we'll join them in doing whatever, painting, opening the door for someone who wants to, I don't know, take a look at the lodge, anything like that. So this is one of our communication habits of sorts today. And some people might have offered some sort of resistance when something like this was proposed. But I can attest that a lot of the brothers that are using this application most effectively in my lodge are some of the older brothers of the lodge. They're constantly updating and making sure that they're informed of what's happening. So communication habits is one thing. Another form of communication that I was thinking about that sometimes is met with resistance is email. Any business, any successful organization in this country has to use email effectively. And I'm sure not all lodges are the same, but let me ask you, when was the last time you received an effective email from your lodge? Like with how inexpensive email marketing systems are and how versatile they are, nothing can stop a lodge from putting a brother into an email list that will touch base with him 3 weeks before dues are due automatically, and a reminder a week before the lodge dues are supposed to be paid, to get an automatic email on their birthday, saying, some message. Like, these are tools that are available, and corporations and other organizations are using them very effectively. We could use them too without compromising any of the tenets or any of the principles that we espouse.
No, I think you nailed it right there between communication and community. That really sums up some of the modern differences that we have, and modern even just being within the past 10 to 15 years that we've had this explosion of the information age. And again, we're not talking just technology. but how we interact with technology, how we are bombarded with information.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing about that community that you mentioned, think about this, and I'm not going to say names, but we have brothers that we haven't seen since June, when we had our last year, since we had our event in Alexandria. However, we've remained in contact. We have supported one another through the loss of a family. We have congratulated one another in achievements. We've helped one another in finding work. I have brothers that I've reached out to in moments of need. Brothers have reached out to me in moments of difficulty. All of this has happened through email, text message, Facebook, um, MySpace, ICQ. Wait, no.
not quite ICQ, but
So imagine, and the bonds that are built when we talk about brotherly love, like some of the interactions we've had with some of these brothers, they've brought us really close, and we haven't sat in lodge recently.
that's it, and that's because of the mystic tie or the fraternity for those things that are not to be innovated upon, which allows for a modern setting, right? That we have this shared initiatic experience, that we all have a common, for the most part, bond on. And then when we take that forward and apply it, hashtag applied Freemasonry, into our modern life, then you can see where we need to adapt that to our modern needs and habits. How do we take that forward? How do we take this ancient syncretic system that's over 300 years old and apply it to being stressed out as a job, trying to balance being a dad, trying to balance being a good husband, trying to balance being a good employee. It's hard. It's very hard. And it's by the way, the answers are much different now than they were during Ben Franklin's time frame. If you have any questions on that, go back and you can see in Ben Franklin's autobiography, he lists a calendar by hour of his average day. And he just like took off like 4 hours in the afternoon just to like hang out and read, and then went back to work. Right? Nobody does that in the 21st century. You'd be fired if you did that.
Yeah, right.
So obviously the same application of Masonic principles and philosophies and ideals have to translate differently, and that's specifically the modernization we're talking about, not what was called out on Reddit, where apparently we think we should modernize by letting in women, websites, selling more stuff, being more open, being more politically charged, etc. And corporate. Somehow we're corporate as well.
I think all of those have some sort of place, maybe in the future of Freemasonry or of a particular lodge or a particular organization. But like one of the things too that I struggled with reading some of those responses, and then also thinking about internally why I'm resistant to change, right? Like I always have the latest and greatest tech. My wife doesn't like it when I upgrade her phone. Why? Because she's comfortable with it. And I think the same is really true with even things like our fraternity. We're comfortable with it. We like it the way it is. We don't want to have to change anything because then we got to learn something new. But also I think, the other week we talked about biases. And I think John had declinism, right? Where you remember the past as better than it was and expect the future to be worse than it will likely be. Like
That's true.
That's the horror of what happens when these young guys take over. People are like, oh God. When I graduated high school, I didn't think anything of it. And now I'm 36 and I think somebody from my class will be president one day. I'm like, we're screwed.
We're screwed. We're boned.
But that's me being, that's my bias or whatever. But when I think about some of the ways, Juan has a wonderful way of talking about the practical ways we apply Freemasonry with his program, but we have like just some things that we can do now to modernize is like, of course, our communication styles, but are like our teaching techniques. Like even they have teaching techniques that are proven to like make kids absorb even more, make students absorb even more, better, faster. Like, where are those programs? Why aren't we developing that kind of thing? Because there is something to be taught. Freemasonry is an educational system. But I think
to be modernized, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so we've got other things too, like transparency. Transparency is a big one, and something that always hit on me personally was, of course, we have to be on the Master Mason degree to hold business in some places, not here in Illinois. Recently changed a few years back. And one of my fellow lodge members, when I was the master, I tried to make it a habit to just open up on whatever degree for the lowest guy there. And that's where we're holding business. And the guy was like, "Oh, I don't like doing that because, they need to, if they want to sit at the big boys table, they need to get through their degrees and memorize the work and yada, yada, yada." And my thing was, there's nothing at the big boys table, but it's the same stuff they do at home. So if you want them here, let them in. Like, that's transparency to me. Being accepting, being transparent when you're allowed to. I know our organization doesn't always allow you to open up on the first degree for business or second degree or whatever. But transparency, and in the workplace, we talk about things like, employee opportunity. As far as modernizing, right? Like in the past, it was just the grind until somebody tapped you on the shoulder and up you went. Today's employees need to see the opportunity. And if we're not out there giving them opportunities, then that's another thing that a way we can modernize is looking at how we give out opportunities to lodge members. Whether that's saying, "Hey, Bob, here is a suitcase. Inside this suitcase is a ridiculous amount of documentation about the history of our lodge. I've seen some of the work you've done in the past. Would you be at all interested in helping us put this together?" Whatever it is. Get a lodge historian. Whatever it is, you have to allow for opportunity development. And there's just, you can just look at the corporate world, or somebody said, look at the corporate, they're great all corporate, right? But I guess in small sense, yeah, like you take those successful habits of organizations, not just corporate, but organizations, whether that's, part of my research for tonight's episode, I tried to look up the modernizing of the Elks, the modernizing of Kiwanis, the modernizing of the Moose. And you know what I found out? Nothing. Because they don't do it. And they're all suffering.
Yes, their numbers are falling just as fast as ours, if not faster.
Yeah. I mean, hey, go ahead.
What about churches? I mean, this is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening with religious institutions, and the churches that are thriving, that are growing, that are expanding, are the ones that are embracing the modern needs and habits of their constituents. One of the things, and you mentioned earlier about applied Freemasonry, when I started thinking of putting it together, I wanted to offer some practical advice for brothers to put into their lives. Of course, the source material that I have is the books that I have and, lessons that I've acquired through the ritual and all that. But none of it talks about a stay-at-home dad. None of that talks about social media, and none of it talks about modern research in sleep deprivation and accident prone, how accident prone people are when they're sleep deprived. That's what we delve in when we go into applied Freemasonry, is like, okay, this is not just something that's out there let's talk about how your life is and how some of these lessons of Masonry can be utilized to make you a better fill in the blank, whatever you're into. But one thing that I wanted to mention about it is like, which I think every lodge should do, is have an entry interview and an exit interview, because we're going to lose members inevitably. There's a percentage of attrition within our organization, but finding out why people are leaving will allow us to be more effective at retaining the people that we already have and presenting something that is worthwhile for the people that are looking in. It doesn't mean that we're going to invent a Freemasonry. Most of the things that we came in to Freemasonry looking for, most of those things are there. They're part of the lessons of Masonry. Are they effectively, linked with what the life of this individual is? Not always. There are some lodges that exceed at it, many don't. But every lodge should ask the questions: what are you coming for? What are you expecting out of us? And then make an honest assessment. Are we providing that for this kind of person? Let me not fool him into thinking he's going to get it if he's not going to, and try to take steps to provide it.
That's really interesting you bring that up, because it's also kind of a branding perspective, right? In the sense of, we are often under the perception of mystery, right? Which there are some awesome mysteries in Freemasonry, and I'm not going to be, underplay any of those. But often the lodge experience for some guys does not meet up to the expectation of being outside the curtain versus being inside the curtain, right? So that alone could be a modernization, right? If you think about it, of true customer service, right? Giving people more than what they expect. I think back to what Walt Disney used to do, is he would ask his Imagineers to go build something, for a ride or for, some sort of animation. And when they would deliver exactly what he asked for, he said, "That's okay. Now plus it." And plus it was a term that he gave that basically says, you met all the requirements, but add just the one little piece on top of that. Add some icing to the cake that makes it better than just doing just good enough. And if we could plus up everything, that the whole lodge experience, and the whole lodge experience, not just being the initiatic experience through the degrees, but the lodge experience of when you walk in through the door of the lodge, how many guys come up and say hi and shake your hand? And I've been recently touched by, there was a video that's being shared, I think in the Winding Stairs group this today, about how a Grand Lodge up in Massachusetts actually went out and reached out to brothers who had demitted, and said, please tell us on record how we failed. And I think that is the most admirable, the bravest thing that those lodges did, was to reach out. And there was some harsh feedback. I got a letter that said I was demitted in October, and it was stamped dated on the letterhead in March. And no one talked to me at all. And I found out about it when I got the letter in the mail. Those kind of things. That experience should never happen. And those are all little simple things that is a modernization about timeliness of communication, everything Juan said earlier, right? That's a modernization that is not a technical modernization. I think that's the other thing too. It's easy to go to digital for a lot of the stuff that we talk about, but basic, human-centered design on what the lodge experience is like, that is a modernization that could cost you nothing to do, free or cheap to do, requires no technology investment, but could, really turn around the application of Freemasonry today. So.
I love the term "plus it."
Yeah.
Like, to me, that just screams. It's like when I could just see, here's the schematics, build it. And you get it, and like applying that to the Masonic experience, when you go out and you see a degree happen. Okay, well, I had never ever been to like a TO styled lodge before. I went to Crown Martyrs Lodge just I think last month, maybe the month before, with Scott. And they wouldn't let us in the lodge room or anything until the procession happened. And right when I walked in, I was like, yeah, this was cool. Like just the ritual of entrance in the lodge was something that I'm like, yep, I could get used to this. And to me, that was a plus it thing, right? That was normal Masonry.
Not an innovation.
Not an innovation. Exactly. It was just
At all the requirements.
Yeah, it met all the requirements, but also added something special. And they took their time. And this was a stated meeting. And like a stated meeting where there was plenty of business, yet I still felt like I had a spiritual experience. And I thought that's really cool. Like that's what I got into the craft for. And so like I can only imagine what an education night might be, if you do a business that way. There's been articles that were written, it says, these TO lodges are so great or whatever, but after a while, there's a monotony that comes with that too. And that's probably true. But for somebody who'd never been in a TO lodge before, wow, it was pretty rad experience. And for me, I don't know, I guess that's like kind of a throwback. Is that a hipster thing? Like if it's old, but you want to make it again?
You like basically
you bring it,
cool, right?
Declinism.
Yeah.
Very cool. This is a good time to start kind of wrapping things up. Social media's been light, but great comments on the YouTube channel. I think the one thing I'll mention earlier was brought up of one viewer's opinion was maybe everything outside of the Tower Lodge should be modernized. And that's where I think I would disagree, specifically about the business portion of it. And again, that's mostly due to Virginia being a state where business has to be conducted inside of the state in meeting. It cannot be delegated out. And so because that is written to our Grand Lodge laws, that the discussion on the light bulbs has to be done in lodge. Everyone has to suffer, including visitors. So that's an interesting thing, that only modernization of that aspect would only be done through amendments to our state Masonic law. So that's certainly possible, but much harder for an individual brother to do.
And for the brothers who might have missed our last episode where we talk about cognitive bias, the framing one fits in perfectly. There is change that is necessary within Freemasonry, not to change. Again, I can't reiterate this enough, because I bet you someone's watching this late and is gonna get his aprons in a bunch. Not suggesting that ritual is changed, but there are things that are to be modernized, and you can't do that by force. Just put yourself in the shoes of a brother who has spent 3 decades in the craft, who has seen all kinds of things, has an incredible pride in the way things are done, settled into the comfort of his own routines, and here comes this young whippersnapper with all these ideas. Let's change this, change that.
I'm gonna take the. I'm gonna put that on a ringtone.
I appreciate that. It's gonna be spicy. So, if you think about it like that, of course you're gonna be met with resistance. If you try, and this happens all the time. People join Masonry, they want to change it. Okay, I understand there are things that might not be efficient, but if you have any hopes of making any change, your framing is going to be crucial. How you present the necessity of this change. Do you even categorize it as change? Could you perhaps call it improvement, or call it enhancement, or what was it? Plussing the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So if the way in which you position this, and that is dependent 100% on your grammatical, logical, and rhetorical ability. If you fail at embracing the importance of those three, forget about that change you're dreaming about.
That's awesome. Yeah, totally agree. Robert, let's start taking it home for final thoughts and shameless plugs. So, what are your final thoughts on tonight's episode?
It's real simple. I really do feel like the most painless, relatively speaking, way to modernize is to listen, like not to respond, but to understand needs and wants of the men coming in. And I know there's going to be people who say, we're not for everybody. And I totally agree with you. Totally, 100%. In fact, I've been called an elitist because of what I think the requirements of somebody, searching out Freemasonry should be looking for. But what I want to say is that in order to successfully modernize, we need to at least listen and give credibility to the younger members. And when I say younger members, I'm not always talking about just in age. I'm talking about in age of the fraternity. If you're a 50-year-old guy who joins, you're a young Freemason. And I think, the fraternity needs to speak to you in a way that allows you to be comfortable. And the same with the 20-year-old or the 18-year-old who's allowed to join. I think about this often, and it's really changed my outlook. My son came to me and he said, "Dad, can we go see Roman Atwood? He's coming to the theater in Chicago. I want to go see him. He's this YouTube guy. He does pranks and blah, 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 blah." And I was like, what? We're not going to go to a theater and watch a YouTube guy pull pranks on a stage. And these tickets are like $100, dude. No. Get out of here with this, right? The Crushing Soul. This is what I mean. Like, he was like so bummed. And I sat there on the couch, and I don't know, something in the back of my mind was like, hey. And I asked my ma, I said, "Ma, what's the deal with this?" And she said, well, my grandparents thought rock and roll was terrible. And I was like, did I just tell my son, turn that rock and roll music off? And, I thought about that and just listening. And so now, like, if he's like, "Dad, I want to go see Dude Perfect," or "I want to go see these guys," or whoever these YouTube guys are, as long as they're like positive influences or whatever, I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's go do something fun. And I'm listening to you. I want to listen to you, and I want to understand what you're into in the modern things that you're doing and the modern thinking behind things. And so much of modernization just boils down to that. It's thinking. It's a state of mind. It's not always tangible objects or practices. It's a state of mind, and I think we need to just listen and be open to the world that's in front of us, to the world that's coming. Everything's on the horizon, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, and I think if we are open to actually listening and understanding where people are coming from, and not being subjective all the time, we have a really good chance at being successful and modernizing in a way that, again, is not painful. So I hope, as we tackled it this time around, we've tackled this subject in the past, and it was largely about, the minutes or email or whatever the case may be, how to run a lodge, in a modern way. But in this sense, this is more of a holistic idea of how we can move this fraternity successfully into centuries to come. So with that, I hope you really enjoyed the episode. Really missed out having Hammy here and Jason, who get well soon, dude. He's got a little under the weather, but great episode. Always learn a lot. I really appreciate John your thoughts on the matter, because you are somebody who's so technologically advanced. But to hear you talk about some whole, you take those ideas and you bring them into a holistic concept a little bit sometimes, and I think about things a totally different way, a new dynamic. And Juan, the way you talk about things in a practical way, I had, to be quite honest with you, until your first few episodes of Winding Stairs, I never really thought about Masonry applied practically into a modern day situation. So that was like my first experience thinking about that. So it was always really cool to hear about that, and your viewpoints are always super badass. So thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. Juan, what say you?
Fun episode. Of course, some of it is a little ranty, and we excel at rants, like Reddit. Burn. So thank you for all the brothers who participated. We had a ton of participation on our YouTube channel. It seems to be the most effective way to communicate with us while we're recording the episode. So if you haven't watched live, we invite you to do so. We record it live Tuesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. That's GMT -5 for you international brothers. So join us. The conversation is good because you get an opportunity to, in the moment, steer the conversation for us. So thank you to all the brothers who joined us. We have Dane Dornbos, Sean Mullen, A Fasik, Just Stop, CWH, who else? Joe, brother Joe, from Alexandria, I believe he's right. Virginia, somewhere around there. He's from that side of town. So we have a lot of brothers who have joined and helped in the conversation and give their point of view right while we're recording, so it helps in the conversation. And RJ, I appreciate your what you said about the Winding Stairs. It's the intention that I had behind it. There are a lot of things, a lot of aspects that I love about Freemasonry, but the one that is the most important to me is being able to take one step at a time and reach a higher place. That's what the steps in this represent, and each step is important. And I hope that brothers can get that from this program, the Masonic Roundtable, from the Winding Stairs, from Whence Came You, and all the other programs that brothers like us put together to, in our own little way, modernize Freemasonry. So I hope that we're doing it in an effective way, and you continue to support us. Super pumped up because tomorrow night our new class of Applied Freemasonry starts. We have dozens of brothers that are going to be there, starting to have an in-depth conversation about the importance of living a life of balance, all with Masonic principles. All the brothers in the group are vetted. I get their dues cards before they're able to join in. So this is like, it's tight. It's a tight group, and I love it because it's real talk. Fathers, business owners, dedicated brothers putting together their head to become better. So thank you, brothers, again for watching the Masonic Roundtable, and we'll see you again next week.
Sweet. Very cool. Let's see. Final thoughts on this episode. When it comes to modernizing Masonry, one of my little side passions is on behavioral economics, and again, all these biases that we have, and how do we understand psychology and the human condition, right? And one of many types of reasoning behind some of the resistance you may get for trying to bring up even the concept of modernizing Masonry is one of them is a term called the Endowment Effect. And it's interesting that people have found through repeated studies that people will tend to pay more to retain something they own than to obtain something they did not own, even when there's no cause for that attachment at all. So the example given in the study was that participants were given a mug, just cheap little $3 mug maybe, and then were offered the chance to sell it or trade it for an equally valued alternative, like a pack of pens. And they found that the amount the participants required for compensation for the mug once they owned it then was approximately twice as high as they would have been willing to buy it for in the first place. But because it's mine, I can touch it, and it's my thing now. I have this endowment effect where I'm going to value this twice as high as I would have paid for it in the beginning. So the same thing applies for our traditions that we have in the fraternity, where just the mere fact of the tradition that is our tradition, that we've always done it that way. I know to use the cliche, it does have a psychological effect of, well, we can't give that up. But where if it had never been a tradition and someone said, hey, should we do a pancake breakfast Saturday? Someone would say, I don't know, we really don't need one. But because we've always done one, we have that endowment effect. And so that is the hurdle, the psychological hurdle you have to get over when you bring up any sort of concept of modernizing Masonry. And so stewing on that topic tonight, I think I'm going to modify what I mentioned earlier, my succinct terminology of should cell phones, or I'm going to say should cell phones or modernization be allowed in lodges? And I'm going to append it to say business sometimes, ritual never, but education always. So with that, thanks for watching. Keep searching for more light. Have a good night.